Welcome to episode 176 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. I'm the host, Kim Newlove. Simone Sloan joins me today for an interview. She is a pharmacist, but she is also a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. You can read her bio in the show notes on thepharmacistvoice.com. Today, we are talking about putting the care back in healthcare. If you're new to the Pharmacist Voice podcast, welcome. Again, my name is Kim Newlove, and I'm the host. I'm a pharmacist by training, but I made a career transition to voice actor and podcast host. Among other things, I narrate audiobooks for women pharmacist authors, provide medical narration to clients in the pharmaceutical and biotech industries, and narrate content for explainer videos and e-learning projects. I was inspired by my nonverbal son, who has autism, to combine my background as a pharmacist with my speaking voice and launch my business, The Pharmacist Voice, in 2017. My son Craig helped me realize the power of having a voice and using it. My solo podcast episodes are about some aspect of being a pharmacist, a voice actor, a pharmacist podcaster, or my career transition from pharmacist to voice actor and podcast host. My interview shows feature a variety of people who use their voices to advocate for something, educate in some way, or entertain so that you are inspired to use your voice too. This is episode 176, and you can find the show notes on my website, thepharmacistvoice.com. Just click on the podcast tab and search for episode 176. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Simone Sloan. Hi, Simone. Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice podcast. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Um, you may hear some dogs ruffling in the background, but that's just my little puppy, Rhodesian Ridgeback. So just want to give everyone a heads up.
Oh, I love dogs. So thanks for the heads up. If we hear that, that's all right. We'll just ignore it. Well, I would love to invite you to introduce yourself and explain to my audience who you are and what you specialize in.
Sure. So, born and raised, I'm a pharmacist by trade and have worked within the pharmaceutical industry from a medical affairs standpoint, from the commercialization, market access, global strategy, and have really done a lot of work around people. Today, I say that my company is Your Choice Coach, and we do diversity, equity, inclusion consulting work, and really helping organizations to really understand the people who are in them, empowering them, right, and looking at how to effectively and better engage, relate, connect, trust, and align that back to their overall business strategy.
Thank you for sharing that introduction. I am not an expert on this topic at all. I just want to confess right up front, but I do care about this topic.
Yeah, and I think that it becomes really important to care, and using that word care, especially today when we are very much at polar ends at times. And I think that's one of the words that we're trying to build back into the people piece around kindness and just having and caring. So thank you.
My pleasure. Yes, I love to learn, and this is going to definitely be a learning experience. But more than anything, for the pharmacists, the pharmacy students, pharmacy technicians, and others listening to this, I would like to create this safe space to talk about this topic of putting the care back in healthcare and becoming more culturally competent so that our patients will trust what we're saying. So, as we get started, I'd like to throw out the first question to you.
Sure.
And that would be, who are all of the groups that we need to be culturally competent of when we talk about culturally competent healthcare?
Mm. Who are the groups? I think that's a very loaded question, and one that is, I think I would say, default into saying we have to care about everyone and think about it from that perspective, because we all have a different backgrounds, educational levels, values, the way that we process information, obtain information, and becomes really important to understand the nuances of our audience. We don't have just one group coming, right? We have multitudes. And if we don't understand the different layers that exist behind the skin, the body, the mind, we're missing out in terms of really truly understanding and connecting with the populations that we do treat. Now, we do have marginalized groups, right, who have not been treated very equitable within healthcare and the space. And so it becomes even ultra more important to understand that background, understand their experiences and what might be driving some of the behaviors that or thoughts or interactions, right, within that healthcare space. And so when I mention like BIPOC populations, you have the biracial, indigenous, people of color groups that are maybe talked down to because of maybe language barriers. Just in terms of how they look could be a barrier as well. And so taking that into consideration becomes really important as we communicate information, build trust, right, and really advocate for patient care.
You brought up a lot of really great points. Now, on the receiving end, patients are listening to us as pharmacists, and we may look different from them. We may sound different like them. You brought up language barriers, for example. That's something that is not exactly a racial problem. There may be somebody, I'm a white or Caucasian person. There may be somebody who looks like me but does not talk like me, meaning they have
Absolutely.
that language barrier, or they may have a hearing loss issue. There's all
Absolutely.
kinds of issues that we need to work through. So, how on the receiving end can a patient trust this person who may not look like them or talk like them?
Sure,
That's, I
sure.
think, the biggest question, because I think we can agree it's all about what's in it for the patient. And that's what we need to
Absolutely.
all
Ab-
remember.
Absolutely. And it draws upon an experience I had earlier in my pharmacy days when I was actually within the retail setting. And one of the things that I always had an eye out for were those differences, right? And there was one particular woman who came in with, she was Latinx, and presented herself with two prescriptions, one of which was for asthma. The other one, and she had a history of hypertension. And so, we had a language barrier piece around it, but I knew enough Spanish that I could at least communicate what my concerns were, what my intentions were around that. So, in this busy environment in which I'm working, I pulled this person to the side and I said, "Listen, there's something wrong with these prescriptions. It doesn't seem right, doesn't feel right." And she was like, "No, I just want to get it filled." I said, "No, no, no. I think we need to really, I want to explain to you what I'm seeing." And she's like, "Oh, oh yes, help me. Ayúdame, ayúdame." And so when I called the doctor and explained, and he was like, "Oh, just go ahead." I said, "No, we can't just go ahead and do that because it's not, I don't feel comfortable doing this." And something didn't feel right. And after speaking with that particular physician, he then came around and said, "Okay, let's just go ahead and do one of the two, and we'll hold it and tell her to come back or just to get a reassessment," right, from that perspective. And if I were in that rush, right, the busyness, then that person gets overlooked and who knows, maybe has an adverse event. But I think that just being mindful, right, just in terms of who's in front of us, how are we communicating, how are we connecting with them in that moment, showed an really honesty of caring for that particular patient. So I think that we need to slow down and not get caught up into the transactional pieces of getting things done, but really thinking through who's in front of us, do they understand what's happening, and how do we best communicate to them, right? And are they receiving that information? Do they even want that information? But I think it's our duty as professionals to be able to at least have that connection and the communication to affect change.
Thank you. Yes, we definitely have to have that caring attitude. I totally agree. And I like how you said, let me tell you what I'm seeing, because sometimes that can be the disconnect. Are we seeing the same thing at the same time? It's so important to share what we're seeing and ask the other person on the receiving end, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And then once we're on the same page, that does help facilitate understanding.
Absolutely. And, I think as pharmacists too, the curiosity piece comes into play as part of this and asking, not necessarily the right questions, but just asking questions and probing open-ended to see what the patient really understands or doesn't understand, right? And you mentioned the abilities piece because we do have invisible abilities, right? And if they present themselves in a way that seems, in terms of how you may think they might be operating, it might be different if we start probing and getting some questions of understanding and really doing that reflective listening to verify, to confirm where the breakdowns might be and where there might be some course corrections that might need to take place. So I just think those are some ways to evoke some empathy, evoke curiosity as part of that our practice.
You just scored some points with this girl because I have a son with autism and
Mm,
he has an invisible disability. When he, as you say, presents in front of a medical professional, until you get that reflective understanding piece going on, do you understand this? Please tell me what you heard, things of that nature. You'll find out real quick. My nonverbal son who can't read, write, or speak does
mm,
not understand what's going on. That's
yeah,
why I'm his advocate. That's why I'm his voice. That's why I'm his guardian. So thank
absolutely.
you for bringing up that piece. Those invisible disabilities are so hard to detect, and getting that reassurance that the person on the receiving end does understand is
Absolutely.
important.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Absolutely. And so, yeah. Thanks for sharing that too.
Yes. Yes. No problem. Simone, perspectives and feelings are important. I know that your dog right now is feeling left out of this conversation. If anybody can hear that, please laugh. But in all seriousness, thoughts and perspectives are important. People who feel somehow that they are not understood because the person across the table does not look like them or sound like them. Can we get some examples of what that feels like or what that looks like, please?
Absolutely. But before we go into that, also understand that perception is reality. And it's not how you think, it's how the other person might be receiving it, right? And
Right.
this is where the emotional intelligence piece comes into play heavily because it's how we're expressing ourselves, but then how is that being received and perceived in that very moment, right? And yes, if you do maybe look different from what your normal folks look like. For example, a BIPOC person, someone maybe with a physical ability, maybe someone even who might be obese in terms of their body size and shapes and things of that nature presents itself, and you have a bias against one of those characteristics, right, of diversity. Your tone changes. Your eye contact may change. The way in which you communicate information or even display care changes. And you may not even realize it, right? Because you're in the moment, but there's a trigger that takes place that causes this reaction. And it becomes really important to understand what are those biases that you hold consciously, unconsciously. Bias is bias, right? And if you're not open and honest about really doing that understanding of self, then it's going to bleed into ways that you may have an undesired impact in terms of what your intentions are, and being mindful about how that comes off and how it sounds and how it's being received, right, from that perspective.
Okay. That emotional intelligence piece is a really good topic to bring up because the emotional intelligence of each individual everywhere in the world is going to be different because of their experiences, how much personal development they've done, how much, how many bad experiences they've had and they've wanted to change because of. Speaking of bad experiences, there are some groups of people out there that don't trust healthcare professionals because of some negative experiences just among their race or their culture. Can we talk a little bit
Absolutely.
about those?
Absolutely. And I think when you think about just the distrust, right, of folks in a white coat in general, and how they have been communicated to, but more importantly, how they've been treated, right? Because when you think about it from the perspective of people of color, for example, and I'll just utilize that, has been a huge distrust within healthcare with this particular group. And it becomes really important to understand that the level of care is impacted in terms of who gets better treatment, how quickly do they get treatment, and even understanding how the disease states may be presenting in these different groups. And I say that because if we are not cognizant of these subtle differences, then the treatment's delayed, they're getting the wrong medication, right? Or potentially they're not even getting that follow up that's rightly due. And so thinking about that particular population. And you have the indigenous folks, right, who have been time and time again, similarly, not getting the proper treatment, not being provided the accurate information, different things that come into play around their health and care. And so understanding that it's sometimes the messenger is really important in this case, and how the message is being delivered is also vitally important as well. And I can think about many instances within history where there have been multitudes of breakdowns, from the Gila cells to Tuskegee to if you go on the reservations themselves and look at how the health deteriorations of some of the indigenous folks and how they live from those perspectives. And it's not something that's happened overnight. It's something that's taken place over several generations, and it's now a multiple generational issue that has resulted. And so I think that we really need to think about when you say, "Oh, I care about it, but it's not a passion of mine." Right? I think it becomes even more vitally important to have that understanding and historical context to take into consideration of why we are here and why actions are being taken or not being taken, and the importance of building that trust even more importantly. And I say trust not just in terms of well, I showed up and I did this and woohoo, I checked the box. No, it's the consistency and constancy of that relationship building that's vitally important. So you're not just showing up once every 6 months, or connecting with someone once every a year and then thinking, oh, I have a relationship with that person. It's the little things that build in. Because I bring in back the story with the woman who I helped, right, from that perspective. But then she started bringing in her family members because there was somewhat of a trust there, right, in terms of how you communicated, interacted, showed that care, just demonstrated that you care from that one experience. So I think that, yeah, I hope I answered that question.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
You mentioned Gila, which many people that go to pharmacy school may not learn about, but I read the book, I loved it, and I didn't realize how much of a contribution Henrietta Lacks made to research,
Absolutely.
cancer research.
Not only cancer research, but you're talking about everything we touch, from makeup, right? And that's a multi-billion-dollar industry, because you're thinking about an idea where they were trying to grow cells in a tube at that one point, and you have this person come in, but not even tell her what they were doing, what, right? And they just took it and assumed that it was okay to take. Again, that lack of trust, not caring about the diversities, not even having that sensitivity, right? So, and thinking about how much of an impact those cells had on so many different things that we touch today and continue to touch. So, yeah, and not finding out till years later, right? Accidentally, right? In terms of the
Yes,
impact. Yeah.
right. Yeah, I can see how distrust could be fostered from such an experience. And you talked about Tuskegee a little bit. I haven't educated myself extremely well about that, but I understand that there was a group of people that were experimented on and not really told what was going on.
No,
Yeah,
they
go
were
ahead.
not. They were not. Just in terms of a very high level piece, therapies were available. Penicillin was available to treat, and rather than saying, "Hey, we have a therapy to give you," go, they dragged this on and not giving them the therapy, right? That was rightfully available. And so as a result of that, that also deepens the level of distrust that takes place within healthcare professionals. Are they really giving me the right thing? Are they really going to act in my best interest? Are they really going to be there when I really need them? Right. And so those are some of the things that swirls around in terms of some the minds of some of the patients. And we have to be cognizant of that.
Yes, and I'm glad that people bring these things forward because I had no idea the impact that that thinking would make on the COVID-19 vaccine. And if you'd like to talk a little bit about that, I invite you to talk about that as well.
Sure. Well, what we I think we all saw, right? And just in terms of, do I trust this thing? Do I trust the government? What's it going to do to me? So I think that that also played in terms of within the relationship with healthcare and people of color, in particularly, not fully, maybe not getting all the information fully informed, and being told, "Oh, just come here, line up, and we'll just jab you." I don't think so. Yeah.
I can see how that would lead to distrust. Uh, People with having a history of distrust and being in a situation where their their life will improve if they trust, but they don't know if they can. It's got to be that a dilemma, a true dilemma. Do I trust or do I not trust? It brought to light the whole topic of trusting the messenger, like who's
Mm.
telling you this information. Can you talk a little bit about how, as pharmacists, we can be the right messenger even though we don't look like someone and we don't talk like someone?
Got it. Um, and this is it's tricky, right? Because, but I think there are two pieces that come to play around this, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, and it's around the empathy piece, right? Understanding and gaining understanding. It's around educating yourself as well in terms of the populations in which you're serving, right? To be abreast of some of the things that are going on situationally, currently, historically, but then also curiosity and asking those questions of yourself, but also too of your patients to ensure that there is that connection, right, around it. I use cultural competency as a terminology that in really to gain understandings. But when you break it down, it's around how do we behave in terms of our mindset, in terms of what we do when experiencing similarities and differences. And it becomes really important to understand that because many of us may think, oh, I'm colorblind. Oh, I'm totally, maybe use the word woke, if you will. But really and truly, it's how you may think that you are colorblind. And is that the right thing to say? I am colorblind. And I'm going to say no. Because when you think that you're colorblind, what you're really saying is, I don't see you, I don't hear you, right? And as a result of that, you don't matter. Now, if you say, listen, I'm like you kind of introduced and said, this is something I care about, I'm still learning, right, in that journey, that then tells me that there's some kind of intent there of an understanding, an intent to really want to ask questions and to better help me, right? So I think the intentions of how you're approaching differences, similarities, is important, very important.
Thank you for sharing that. I think personal development is something that we should all care about. We should all seek to understand first before being understood. I think that's actually a Dale Carnegie
Yeah.
thing, but yeah. But
Or Stephen
really,
Covey, one of the two.
one of the two. Yeah. I personally feel like it is my responsibility to educate myself about whatever topics will make me get the, I'm sorry, but I want to check the box. I want to be more culturally competent. I invite people of all kinds of backgrounds to be on my podcast. And it's not because I'm trying to check boxes. I'm genuinely curious about people. I know where I came from. And I don't know where they came from, but we're both pharmacists, and I want to find out what are their strengths? What are their passions? What are their skills? And I feel like I become a little bit more culturally competent every time I have somebody who doesn't look like me or talk like me on my podcast. But aside from that, if I were a practicing pharmacist, I would still seek to educate myself and develop myself personally so that I'm better able to get positive health outcomes for my patient. And I want to charge every listener who's listening to this podcast episode today, you have a responsibility to educate yourself and become more culturally competent. And Simone, I would like to ask you, what action steps can pharmacists, pharmacy students, et cetera, take to become more culturally competent for the sake of their patients?
Great question. I would say, one, get to know what your true biases are within yourselves, and that's that self reflection piece around it. Two, as you are engaging your patients, and I know some of our great pharmacists and we're doing this anyway, but just in terms of doing those open-ended questions of asking and not putting any judgments and assumptions into those questions already, but really truly coming from care and heart for your patients. But three, listen, right? And it's not you always doing the talking, but them getting to understand where their story is, what sorts of challenges that they may be experiencing, so that way we can better provide, I wouldn't say solutions, but at least some actions that they can take on to work within the environment that they're kind of navigating, if that makes sense.
That's totally fair. Yeah. I think that if all of us would develop ourselves personally in the way of figuring out what those biases are. For example, oh, here comes a gray-haired lady. I know she's going to talk my ear off. You know, if we would just address that and think like what is in this transaction for me? What's in it for them? How can I be sensitive to their needs? I I think we'd get to the point of helping them faster and get over the bias quicker. What do you think, Simone?
Yeah, you know, because I'm also thinking too that we get so caught up in the transactional pieces of the work that some it just gets stepped on and stepped over, and it just becomes another number. Okay, good, it's out the door, right? And I think that that slowing down piece becomes very important. And I know it can be challenging, but I think it's really vitally important, especially today when we started our conversation with care, and I think it's even more vitally important that we think through what does it really mean to put care in patient care, and really see the person who's in front of us, hearing that person who's in front of us, not making those assumptions and judgments. Because at the end of the day, we're more similar than we are different, and everybody wants to be seen, heard, valued, respected, and understood.
I know there's a lot of people out there that don't want to change, both pharmacists and patients. How do we help them?
Yeah. You know, and we have a lot of that in society that don't want to change. And change is a very hard thing. It comes with a lot of emotions, right? And stress that comes in it because there's an unknown. What's going to happen to me? Right? What do I have to give up as part of this? Right? What am I losing? And I think that if we look at change as an opportunity, it changes our whole mindset. And I hate to use the word change again in the same sentence, in terms of how we embrace that unknown. Now, we have folks that are, have always seen, for example, a male pharmacist, and that's what they wanted. No, I'm the pharmacist, and they're looking around at the technician because they happen to be a person who's a male. And I said, well, if you want to talk to the technician, they can come next to me, but I am the pharmacist, right? Or you can come back another day when you want to see someone else you may want to talk to. So people come in with their own types of biases of how things are, how they should be, and who they actually want to hear from, right? And receive information from and even communicate and collaborate with. And I think that we really need to think that through because change is happening whether you want it or not, right? And if so basically you can either be on the bus of change or you could just wait for it to happen to you because it's happening regardless, right? You can choose how you want to embrace it or not. And you have folks from both sides, right? In terms of the pharmacists who have their ways of doing things. This has always been done. They have a system and approach, and gosh, you break out of that comfort areas, and their whole world goes into a different psyche, if you will. And then you have those patients who come in with their own biases, and you don't know how to deal with that because this is who they are. But we can start enrolling people in what this change is and how, the expectations that how they need to show up. So, for example, if there's a pharmacist who does not want to embrace change or does not understand genders, the various, and only wants to do binary genders, when we know there are multitudes of genders out there, doesn't want to address the person the way in which they want to be identified, that needs to be addressed because that's exclusion. Likewise, on the other end, patients who come in with their own biases and may say some things that microaggression, something derogatory, even something racist, right? You can say, listen, this is not going to happen here. You can go somewhere else. We're not going to accept your dollars, right? And that's how you start enrolling people in terms of what this is, how the expectations that they need to start showing up as part of this inclusive world in which we are living in.
Hmm. When you said the word bus and, the bus could leave, you can get it on it or not. You made me think of something. You made me think of cultural competency as the vehicle that's going
Mm,
to help us put the care back in healthcare and help the patients get the outcomes that they want. That is a great way to think of that.
I like it. I like that.
Get
Absolutely.
on the bus.
Get on the bus. But the bus is not going to drive itself. You
Yes.
have to do the work, right? And that takes, it's a lot of work. And it's not something that's a, quick snap, a flip, oh, I'm done. I took a course, I'm great. Absolutely not. It's practice and we're human beings. We have our ways and beliefs and values of how we got here. And it's about unraveling that. It's not about changing who you are. It's unraveling that and becoming more open in terms of your mindset, open in terms of how you're communicating, right, from that perspective, and just open in terms of how you engage others authentically.
Yes, I love the messages of inclusion and just the whole being curious about other people and being inclusive and being more socially competent, socially intelligent. Yeah, emotionally intelligent.
Emotionally intelligent,
Yes,
yes,
sorry. I
emotionally
knew I'd
intelligent.
get to it eventually, Simone. Becoming more emotionally intelligent. Again, this is something I'm interested in, but it's not my forte. It's not my passion, but I do care about it. And I hope that everybody listening to this will just level up with their cultural competency or their level of caring about it because it is part of the vehicle that's going to get us to the point where we're going to put the care back in healthcare and get people to
Absolutely.
listen to us and get better health outcomes. And that's what it's all
Absolutely.
about.
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, as we're starting to wrap this up, is there anything else you'd like to add or share?
I would say that as pharmacists, we're at the forefront really in terms of embracing the various cultures that come into our establishments and to providing that education and level. And it becomes a really important responsibility to ensure that we're educated ourselves, not only in terms of the craft that we do, but the folks that we interact and engage with. So that way, everyone feels included, everyone can feel heard, and everyone is respected when getting it and receiving that care.
I would like to know, are there any resources or learning materials that you would recommend to help people who would like something a little more structured and formal on their journey, like a driver's manual on this bus?
um, there are, and can I give you those books later because I don't know how the labels of them. There's one, that empathy book, that I would highly recommend. There's an assessment in there, just check your level of empathy. There are some other tools that you can utilize too. I wrote a book on 30-day challenge, where you can look at how to build inclusion daily into your world. Kim, I'm going to have you add that to the show notes.
Perfect. I love that. I love it when people share resources, so I will definitely put those in the show notes. Awesome. Well, Simone, it's been such a pleasure to have you here on the Pharmacist Voice podcast to share how you use your voice, not only as a pharmacist, but as a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. This has been an enlightening conversation. I have loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. That was a great conversation. She mentioned resources toward the end of our conversation. I want to follow up on those. Everything is in the show notes now. Here's a quick list of what you will find. There are 7 links. First is an empathy assessment. It's a quiz. Click the link, take the quiz. It took me about 10 minutes. Second is a link to 30 Days to Courage, a step by step guidebook. This is book 2 of 2, and that's by Carolina M. Billings. Third is the book Empathy, Why It Matters, and How to Get It by Roman Krznariak. Fourth is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. Fifth is the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. Sixth is the book The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, also known as Hela, Hela, Hela. That was written by Rebecca Skloot, Skloot, Skloot. And finally, we mentioned the 7 habits of highly effective people. One of the principles, seek first to understand, then to be understood, by Stephen R. Covey, Covey, Covey. Again, links to all those are on thepharmacistvoice.com. Click on the podcast tab, search for episode 176. You'll see all of these in the show notes. Let's wrap this up now. Improving your level of cultural competency will help you put the care back in healthcare so that your patients will listen to you and ultimately achieve better health outcomes. That is what we want. Check out the links to the resources in the show notes and improve your cultural competency level today. Thank you for listening to episode 176 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Please visit thepharmacistvoice.com to read the show notes. A link to Simone Sloan's LinkedIn page, the resources that I just mentioned, and my social media links are in the show notes. Please feel free to reach out to Simone or me and connect. If you know someone who would like this episode or needs to hear it, please share this with them. And subscribe to or follow the Pharmacist Voice podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube to get each new episode right when it comes out. Thanks again for listening. I'll be back next Friday with a drug name pronunciation episode. I believe it's the 8th in my series. I love this series. Join me next week. I'll talk to you then.